Welcome to Church Pulse Weekly. It's Carey Nieuwhof here. Solo this week. David Kinnaman is off, but it's so good to bring you this podcast. Hey, leaders, we're in your corner, trying to help make sense out of this world that we are called to lead in. And I'm really excited to have Tyler Staton with us today. Going to introduce him in just a moment and welcome him on to Church Pulse Weekly. If you're new to the show, hey, please subscribe. Let us know how this is ministering to you and maybe even some subjects that you would love us to cover or guests you'd love us to have. We'd love to hear from you on that. And wherever you're listening, give this a share on social or, share it with your team. Whatever is great. Hey, make sure that you check out Belay's free resource. They are bringing you this podcast, 25 tasks a pastor can delegate to an assistant. All you have to do is text the word PULSE to 55123 and you get a free download. That's PULSE to 55123. And I'm really excited to be with Barna in Atlanta. The State of Your Church webcast is coming to you. It's absolutely free. It's going to give you new data-informed insights on how people are growing in their faith and will equip you with powerful tools to help you measure what matters. We're going to look at metrics and what are the new metrics moving forward. So it's 90 minutes. And we have the webcast that will air. It's Tuesday, March 1st at 1 o'clock Eastern Time. I'm going to be hosting along with Nona Jones, who's going to co-host with me. Super excited for that. Barna President David Kinnaman will be there. And then we've got Andy Stanley, Bishop Claude Alexander, Ed Stetzer, Tara Beth Leach, Glenn Packiam, Scott Sauls, Jenny Wong Clayville, Randy Frazee, and a whole lot more. Just 90 minutes, Tuesday, March 1st at 1. You can go to barna.com/state of your church. That's barna.com state of your church. And you can register for free. I hope you'll join us for that. And, Tyler's going to come on and join us in a minute. Tyler Staton is the lead pastor of Bridgetown Church in Portland, Oregon. Previously, he served as co-founder and lead pastor of Oaks Church, Brooklyn. His passion is a community that is unexplainable apart from the love and power of God. He's also the author of Searching for Enough and is currently working on a second book, this one on the topic of prayer, and he is the leader for 24/7 prayer in America. Tyler, it's just great to have you. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Carey. Very honored to join you.
Well, very honored to have you. Really do. Your new book is called Praying Like Monks. Is that true? Is that a Praying Like Monks, Living Like Fools?
That's it. That's the title.
That's a great title. That's a great title. Comes out in the fall?
Yeah, it comes out in October.
Right. Okay, so we'll have to watch for that. But man, we've all been through big things, but you've been through a really big thing. You just became the lead pastor of Bridgetown, taking over for John Mark Comer, who held that position for a number of years. Can you give us a bit of the backstory? Like, how did that come about, Tyler?
Yeah, so John Mark has been a good friend for several years. And he was one of the friends that I collaborated with most in ministry. Mm-hmm. Someone that we had written sermons together, we had shared reading, shared ideas, tried to learn from each other's best practices in each other's churches. We were a part of a small group of pastors that did an annual retreat together where we just go to a house and spend 4 nights or so just having intentional conversations, also praying for one another. We'd usually bring somebody in that we all wanted to learn from. So John Mark's someone I would see quite a lot. I'd ministered to his people. He had ministered to mine. And then, and he had always, he had told me for a little while, just as a friend, that he felt like his time, the time for his transition was coming up. But it was one of those things that I never really took seriously. It's like I thought he was just saying it. And I was like, yeah, man, I get it, and then he called me out of the blue one day, left me a voicemail, and called back and just said, he said, hey, this is going to absolutely stun you, but I'm calling to see if maybe you'd want my job. And he said a whole lot of other flattering things, and then I just laughed. And I said, man, there's no way I'm going anywhere.
And you were in New York at this time?
Yeah, I was in New York, and I lived in New York City longer than I lived anywhere else in my life up to that point. It was home, my family's moved around quite a lot, and so I don't really have a hometown, and New York became that over the 12 years that I lived there.
Yeah.
And we had a community that we absolutely love, like still love and miss in some ways. And so we just had no plans to be anywhere else or be doing anything else, and felt like we're right in the midst of what God had called us to do. It was also early COVID. So, it was that period where as a pastor, you're trying to figure out, how do I lead a church that I can't see? I felt incredibly committed to those folks. And so I just in every way had my head to the ground. And John Mark just said then, I get it. I actually told our elders that that's what you would say. Would you please just pray about it for 1 week before you tell me absolutely not? And I said, sure. And that 1 week of prayer led to 6 months of prayer and discernment, which led to hearing a lot of invitations from God, which were confirmed in a lot of different ways that we didn't expect. And I walked a path that felt a lot more like grief than anticipation for a long time, and then began to feel like anticipation. I would say that since I've been here, like often happens with God, what felt like just stepping into the pitch black, now I can see the path in front of me, and I can make sense a little bit of the story that he's writing in my life and drawing us here. That's the bullet point version of about a year of a lot of prayer and discernment.
I'm glad you hinted at emotions. And you said it felt more like grief than anticipation. Can you unpack that a little bit? Because, transitions are emotional for anybody, as somebody who did 5-6 years ago what John Mark did in handing things over to another leader. There's all kinds of emotions associated with that. But I'm sure there's so many emotions associated with that journey for you. What were some of them?
Yeah, I think there's all the emotions that just go along with moving when you're rooted somewhere. We're saying goodbye to our closest friends. We have young children. We were saying goodbye to couples that had moved to within a couple blocks of our apartment because we were going to raise our children next to one another. And, we had all those, I think, romanticized but sincere and really good ideas about let's live like family together. And so there's a tearing when you uproot something, and it felt like that. Like, oh, wow. Secondly, I would say there is the grief of, I think when I walked around Brooklyn, it was filled with spiritual landmarks for me. I'd walk past cafes where I prayed with someone to receive Christ. I would walk past places where God spoke to me about something. I had prayer walked every block of the section of Brooklyn I lived in several times over. And so there was prayers that I had prayed and then seen God respond to everywhere. It was like this geographical place was littered with the evidence of God's faithfulness in my life and in our community. And so then I would walk around and weep when I passed those places, because I would think, oh man, God is not ceasing to write this story in Brooklyn. However, I have been privileged to be a character in it, and I'm now being transitioned to a different community's story. And I feel sad to leave this one, because the way I described it to people is I felt like I was reading an incredible novel, and then I turned the page and I thought a chapter was ending, and in fact the book ended. And it was as if someone had torn the pages out of the chapters that were to come. And I felt sad that I wasn't going to get to ride out the whole story. And so there was that emotion. And then finally, a major emotion for me is I think I had to let my version of my I desired pastoral life die. And I realized that I had never clearly articulated this to myself, but I had always assumed that I would have a life like Eugene Peterson, but without the incredible literary career at the end.
Like church.
I just thought, I'm going to plant a church. I'm going to be faithful to these people. I'm going to give my life away here, and then one day someone will scatter my ashes in Brooklyn, and it'll all be beautiful and humble and simple. And I think that everyone romanticizes different things. I romanticize faithfulness and sacrifice over the long haul. And so not only did I suddenly really feel like, against my own desire, God was calling me to go somewhere else and join a different story, but to my horror, God was calling me to what seemed like objectively a larger platform, a more visible leadership position. I think the things that if I, in my worst moments, might have judged in the back of my mind in another leader, I now realized from an outside perspective, it looks like I am that leader. And
like you're moving on up or whatever, right?
Yeah, and there's and for me, for the things that I had romanticized or even maybe made idols out of that would have prevented me from just clearly hearing the voice of God, those things had to get smashed, and that was painful to see my idealized self taken from me. And yet it was also incredibly important for my own discipleship to Jesus.
So, it was a 6-month process, and I'm going to ask you to do the impossible because there's probably a long, nuanced answer that requires a 2 or 3 hour dinner. But why did you say yes? What was there a turning point where you kind of realized, oh, this is a call and I need to go?
Yeah, I think that the not 3 hour dinner response would be when Christians talk about discernment, what they usually secretly mean is, I'm going to pray and then maybe I'll see a billboard on the highway that tells me exactly what to do, But throughout Christian history, there's really, I think, 3 primary ways of discernment that we can draw on. There is the, Gideon put out a fleece, God clearly speak. Then there is the counsel of many, inviting others into your own discernment. And then there is Ignatian practices of discernment that have to do with listening to God's invitations and allowing him to move my heart in a particular direction over a long period of time in more of a step-by-step sort of way than am I supposed to move across the country or not? And I would just say I did all of those. I did all 3 of those things, and they all indicated that God was calling us to say goodbye to the church that we had planted and led, and to hand that off to another leader, and to take on this church in Portland that we knew basically nothing about. I had been to the Pacific Northwest as a region of the country twice in my life prior to this, both times to minister at Bridgetown. So my entire exposure to this part of the country was John Mark's living room and Bridgetown's sanctuary. And that was it.
That was about it.
We just knew nothing of what we were stepping into, but it felt like God. And so that's how we know what to do. So to sum that, or to color that in a little bit, the first thing I did after praying for that week and realizing, oh my goodness, I think we're actually meant to enter a discernment process here, is I called the longest tenured elders of our church. And I said, hey, I've received this invitation. I'm actually thinking about it. And I want you to pray about it with me. And they weren't just our longest tenured elders. They're also my best friends and the people that have said hard things to me the most. And so they entered into that process. And over the course of the time I was discerning it, both of them, through tears, said directly to me, I don't want you to go, but I think you have to go. This is clearly the voice of God. And then I spent every Saturday, my wife and I would each spend an hour prayer walking. And we had created, through our pastoral team at our church in Brooklyn, actually, a simplified 1-page of Ignatian discernment practices. And we just held questions before God. And both of us felt our hearts moving in the direction of Portland. And yet both of us didn't want God to indicate that. That was so that was even more confirmation, because it wasn't like, well, we could have more space for our kids, and we could, it was more like, God, I'm looking for you to pump the brakes here, and you're not. And then, and particularly my wife's discernment, and that was huge to me because I mean, she had the best friend she'd ever had in her life. Like I knew that it was a big, big change for her, and she didn't have the exciting new position waiting for her on the other side of the country.
Good point.
She had her same life without the community that she loved. And then finally, that whole Gideon fleece thing. There was a number of moments, where you get that someone who doesn't know anything says something to you that is just like, wow, that feels really significant. And I had a couple of those along the way, but one that was really important for me was a phone call with my dad, where my dad, not knowing he knew that I was weighing this, but not knowing any specifics, spoke into it in such a way that just doubled me over in tears. When someone says something and you just know that it's the Spirit speaking through them. So I would just say I held these 3 types of discernment, and it was 3 for 3, and that was clear enough for me. If I'm going to try to live my life by the voice of God, then I feel like that was everything God could say that would lead me to, okay, let's get on a plane.
That's probably the most nuanced explanation of the Great Resignation /move that I've heard in the last few years. It's so refreshing, Tyler. Thanks for sharing it at that level. There's emotions also associated with starting a new position. Someone is filling your shoes in Brooklyn, and those are big shoes to fill. But you also have big shoes to fill. And I think there's a lot of leaders who are in your position where they are following someone with a large profile who made a big impact, not just in their city, but beyond their city. What has that been like? Like, what is your self-talk like? How have you been processing that?
Yeah, I would say on that front, God has been so kind to me. I don't think I've ever felt as fathered by God as I have in that category, because I can honestly say, I know this isn't the common story, but I can honestly say I haven't thought a second about filling John Mark's shoes. And There was 2 experiences that God gave me in the discernment practice that were really important for me. The first was after that week when I was like, oh, I'm actually going to discern this. Immediately that week, the Lord spoke to me through 1 Corinthians 3, that passage, who is Paul, who is Apollos?
Yeah.
And I just heard God saying, who is John Mark? Who is Tyler? Whatever story you're in, it's about suffering love for a community, for my bride. And so if I call you to Portland or if I keep you in Brooklyn, I'm calling you to suffer in love and lay down your life for ordinary people. And so that kind of reminded me what a pawn in God's game I really am. And then secondly, I came here on meaning Portland, where I am now, on a couple of discernment trips where, I was like meeting with the elder board. We were talking about this possibility and everything. And I was asked to lead the staff meeting for Bridgetown, and the elders were going to sit in there and watch it happen and everything, And I had a lot of temptation to lead the staff meeting the way I thought John Mark would lead the staff meeting. And because he's such a close friend, I think I had a pretty good idea.
You could pull it off, right?
of the way he would carry himself. I couldn't do John Mark like John Mark does for sure, but I could be a poor man's John Mark, and I just heard the Lord speak something that from Scripture has really never come to mind that morning. I was on like an early morning jog, and I just heard clear as day the Spirit whisper to me, you will give an account for every word you speak. So do not waste a single breath trying to be someone other than who I've made you to be.
Whoa.
And so that day, I did not prepare for the staff meeting until I had a 20-minute window right before, and I just felt like God was saying, I'm gonna allow you. You need to lead as your true self, as who you really are, not the best stuff that you could possibly come up with. And then we'll see if that sparks something. We'll see if that feels like family. We'll see, that kind of stuff. And so I guess I just feel like the Lord has really protected me. And then in addition to that, I just have to say that my friend and brother, John Mark Comer, has made that part incredibly easy on me as well. He's done all the right things publicly and all the things that you would be told to do about championing someone and everything like that. But more than that, in private, he really does love the church and love me and want to lay down his life for the church. And he really does think, and has reiterated again and again, I think that God called me to lead a chapter of this, and that chapter's over, and I think God's calling you to lead the next one, and I think you're the right person to lead the next one. And so, I feel zero pressure to try to keep things going as he set them in motion, but instead to take the very good foundation he built and make sure that I keep building on it. And that's, again, 1 Corinthians 3, like laying a foundation as a wise builder. And so that's the place that both John Mark and I found ourselves and stayed throughout this transition.
So Barn has done some research into succession over the years and transitions, and just a few stats for you and for leaders to listen in on. It's hard, and they often don't go well. Congregations reported a mix of emotions, and the mix included optimism. 48% said they were optimistic. Gratitude, 23%. Renewed energy, 22%, but also worry, 20%. And that feels pretty accurate, right? You're optimistic, you're a little bit worried, you're grateful. Incoming pastors also reported a range of emotions, but to a higher level. 71% felt optimistic, 53% said they felt renewed energy, 47% said they felt grateful, and 26% were worried. What steps did you take as a team to make your transition to Bridgetown as smooth as possible? Was there anything strategically or spiritually, if you want to call it that you did to sort of make it as healthy as you could for yourself or for the church or both?
Yeah, I would say strategically, I read a lot of books about leading change. I read what I could about leading things that you didn't start. I had 13 years of pastoral experience. All of it was as a founder. So, this was a new thing for me. I sat down with every staff member at every level of the organization at Bridgetown for an hour and learned their story and their experience during their time here. I felt like I had some great counsel. I have been privileged to be mentored by Pete Scazzaro at New Life in New York, and he went through a very healthy transition, which I was right next to with Rich Velotis, and so both of the two of them provided some wonderful and really helpful counsel to me along the way, and to John Mark, actually.
Wow.
And then I would say in my own life, I think I just was prepared for the fact that of a lot of things that haven't happened. God's been incredibly favorable and really kind, and Bridgetown has shown herself to be a very mature community. But I just figured, a decent number of people are going to leave. There's going to be some people that are excited, some people that are really not excited. That there's going to be a range of emotions, and I have to let that chaos happen, and let it not live in my inner being, and love and lead the people that want to remain committed to this church into the next chapter. And I'll probably find out who that is 6 months in or so. And to my utter delight, it has been the vast majority of the congregation, which speaks to the health of the congregation. But I think I was prepared in my internal world. I wasn't worried or fearful. I think I just was aware of both the spiritual and human dynamics at play in things like this. There's some people that are going to be sad that their favorite preacher isn't the preacher they're hearing on Sundays anymore. And at the end of my days, the call on my life is not to be as good a preacher as John Mark Comer. It's to follow Jesus and to teach others to do likewise, and to do that in the gifts that he's given me and the weaknesses that he's given me and the wounds that I carry. It's to give my whole self to lead and disciple other people. And so that sounds better on a podcast than it feels to live all the time. But I think tried to return to that place day in and day out. And then I guess the last thing I would say is I really got to know the elders and the high-level staff at Bridgetown. And I said to them plainly, when I was still discerning this, are you guys in? Because if you're not, I'm probably out. Because
right.
I need you to do this well. And so I think having frank and honest conversations with the folks that I really needed and telling them what I needed from them was really important as well.
That's good advice. So Barna also last fall interviewed adults who attend church, and 57% strongly agreed their church helps them develop habits of prayer that better connect them with God. When you think, John Mark, and I know you two have collaborated on that in the past through your friendship and the different work that you've done together, but prayer has always been a high virtue value at Bridgetown. When you think about COVID and everything we've been through, what are some really practical ways that you are going to try to help the people that you now shepherd, that you now lead, to develop their prayer life?
One way is, one of my great passions is to reclaim the daily prayer rhythm that the ancient Hebrew temple and then the early church lived by, which was morning, midday, and evening prayer. And to do so in I would say, very loosely liturgical way, to pray the Lord's Prayer in the morning, to pray through the Psalms, or to pray for the lost at midday, and to pray through gratitude or the examen in the evening. And that was a way that the early church would actually gather together to do that. But I think it's a way in the modern church, if we can teach and then resource our people to actually effectively live by a daily prayer rhythm like that, then I can know that in my church office at 1 p.m. And the board member that works at Nike and the barista that works a few blocks away, and everyone is pausing to pray through the same movements at the same time each day. That is a way in which we are united, though we might be physically separate from one another. And that is a very sustaining anchor that holds a church through something like COVID, or through limitations to public gatherings that are dependent on charismatic leadership. And so I think that is a key way, is we have to recapture the very best from the more monastic traditions in the Christian faith. And then I think we have to express those. We have to have times of prayer that are sort of wild and charismatic and free and the other end of the spectrum, so that we know that prayer is both the anchor that holds and sustains us, and it is the greatest experience of intimacy with the Father that we have. It's where we dance around his throne. It's where we enjoy his presence. It is both of those things. And then lastly, I would just say that I also believe that prayer is what propels mission. So we have to have rhythms of prayer that are fixed in the church. We have to have seasons of prayer where we just really go for it. And for us here at Bridgetown, that looks like we're starting February 1st, 24/7 prayer for the month of February. So there's going to be congregants showing up here at 3 a.m. to pray all throughout the month. We're starting with a midnight hour of worship and prayer together as a whole church. We're having a worship service from midnight to 1 a.m. just to hallow his name. So it looks like that. And then lastly, I think that the church's mission needs to be propelled by prayer. So what are the ways that God has called us to serve the city? I think we discover when we pray, and then we respond, and we tell stories of, we're now engaging in the foster care system in our city in this way because God spoke this to these 7 congregants as they prayed in the prayer room. And so we believe this is the Spirit's invitation to us, and we allow prayer to be the engine for mission. So I would say it's got to be those 3 things, and those 3 things can live through a time like COVID.
Wow. Okay, Tyler, one more question for you, and this has been a great conversation. We have been tracking, Barna and myself personally, we've been tracking the exhaustion that a lot of leaders feel. And it has been a very hard season. But a lot of leaders listening to this probably feel dry spiritually. Their prayer life is kind of shriveled. Their reading, if anything, is there, but it's a bit rote. What advice would you have for spiritual renewal for leaders who are listening and they're just thirsty, they're dry, they're tired? What would you tell them to do?
Yeah, I would say two simple things. First of all, you mentioned before those stats about transition.
Yeah.
And an interesting thing I didn't comment on is just the high feelings of optimism for pastors transitioning somewhere new.
Yeah.
And I think that there's just a human element to Christian leadership that we need to be aware of. Like when I first got here to Bridgetown, my wife would ask me how I'm doing, and I would just say, I love new people with new problems. I have all the patience in the world for these problems because I haven't been dealing with them for the last 10 years, and so I think there's something
That's
to
funny.
that. We all have fatigue at chipping away at the same problems among the same people, and there is an invitation to know something of Jesus there. And so I think simply identifying where you just have fatigue from this community isn't transforming fast enough or whatever it may be is important to name and just be aware of in your own human psyche. And hopefully to receive that as an invitation to intimacy with Jesus, to know his patience, his shepherding, his care over your own soul. And to let gratitude arise from there and compassion arise from there for the people that you serve. And then secondly, and most directly, I would just say consecrate yourself. I would say figure out what in my life is numbing my taste buds for God. Like neutral things that are numbing my taste buds for God. Is there a way that I'm using a drink on a Friday evening to give me the rest that the Spirit it promises to give? Or am I allowing the affirmation of one or two people in my congregation to give me the Father's affirmation over my life? Or am I allowing, an escape into some sort of use of media, whether it's like watching sports or a television show or whatever? I don't know. Everyone's got their stuff. Everyone has their coping mechanisms. And I would say that my experience is this, that when I, in particular seasons for particular times, strip myself of my coping mechanisms and say day in and day out, Lord, I want to hunger for you. I want to thirst for you. Then it hurts at first and it produces joy in the end. And there's a quote from St. Francis. He says he puts salt on our lips that we might thirst for him. And so I think often I'll say, you know what? I've got these couple things in my life that are neutral things. They're not sin. They're good things God created that are meant to be enjoyed. But the truth is that if I take these 40 days and remove them and say, make me thirsty for your Spirit, God, because I am numbing out and I'm becoming dry. And I want to... I think that a leader's spiritual passion is their own responsibility. So I need to be hungry. I need to be thirsty. Because if I'm not, how can I lead people? How can I lead people to thirst for the presence of God if I'm primarily thirsty to get home on a Sunday evening and veg out and watch another episode of that show? So if I'm not more thirsty for the presence of God than that, then I've got something in my inner life I need to attend to as a leader. And the way that I see in Scripture that God gives us to do that is consecration. So I would just say, hold your whole life before the Lord and consecrate yourself to him. And then finally, a thought on that is just, I think sometimes we minimize what spiritual disciplines or spiritual practices are and are not. And I once heard Ruth Haley Barton say, anything can be a spiritual discipline as long as you connect the gift to the giver. And so I would say that any form of consecration is a spiritual discipline. It's a spiritual practice as true as prayer or scripture reading or silence and solitude or whatever, so long as you hold your whole life before the Lord, ask him to put his finger on one or two things, and then say, okay, God, you can have these things for a little while, and would you give me hunger and thirst for you as I resist these coping mechanisms?
Well, leaders who listen to the end are glad they did. That was really, really rich, Tyler. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Tyler, what are you active on social? Where's the easiest place for people to connect with you these days online?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm active on social, but I try to remember that I have an Instagram every once in a while. My Instagram handle is just Tyler C, as in Charles Staton, Tyler C Staton, and that is the social media mechanism that I'm the most active on.
Okay. Tyler, this has been great. Thank you so much. And leaders, hey, I really, really hope this is a little bit of water for a parched soul. It really helped me. Want to thank our partner on this podcast too. Belay wants to help lift some of the burden of leadership in a different way. And if you are overwhelmed, check out their resource, 25 Tasks a Pastor Can Delegate to an Assistant. Text the word PULSE to 55123. It's a free download. That's PULSE to 55123. And then join David Kinnaman, Nona Jones, Andy Stanley. Who else have we got? Ed Stetzer, Tara Beth Leach, Glenn Packiam, Jenny Wong Clayville, Randy Frazee, Scott Sauls, and more at the State of Your Church webinar. It's happening March 1st. It's free. It's a 90-minute event. Go to barna.com/stateofyourchurch for more information. We'll catch you next time on Church Pulse Weekly.